Welcome to Dawg Bytes. We're going to talk about animal behavior today, and I love these pictures. I had fun looking for some pictures to show that animals aren't always like what we think they are, but the number one rule is they can react differently. Even though it's something you've had forever, you need to make sure that you're aware and realize these are wild animals. Whether it's a house cat or a tame dog, it's important to make sure that you are aware that these are animals. Behavior is any action that can be observed and described. There's always the debate about what is inherited, which is nature, and what's environmental, which is nurture. Lots of studies done on twins raised in different households or family members that get separated, they study them. But our behavior is actually wired. It's neural and hormonal. There is a lot of evidence that shows that nearly all behaviors have a genetic basis, as well as the environment can play a role in it. So I tried to find a simple way to do an overview on what we're looking at with behavior. And if you jump down to C and D, we have innate behavior, which is instinctive or automatic, and then we have learned behavior. And there's two main ones that we see: classical and operant conditioning, probably talked about them in psychology class, but then also insight learning, and then habituation as well, habit type of behavior. After a while, though, instinctive behavior can change, and that's what, of course, we call learning. Genetics is the basis for all behavior. It determines our overall behavior, and then the environment is the non-genetic influences, everything from prenatal nutrition to the environment around us. So if the mother doesn't get enough food during pregnancy, if she takes drugs, drinks alcohol, things like that, that's going to change and affect the baby's development. And the nurturing that takes place afterwards is critical as well. When we're talking about the basic instinctive behavior, there's what's called fixed action patterns. There's a sign stimulus. There's something that triggers this behavior, and it's typically an environmental trigger. In this case of the gray-legged goose there, anything it notices outside of its nest that looks like an egg, it will roll it back into its nest. They've put tennis balls out there. They've put ostrich eggs out there. They've stuck things out there that make it think it's an egg, and so it will hook its beak like that and roll it backwards into the nest and then sit on it just like it's one of its own eggs. We see the fixed action pattern. The male sees a female, his feathers go up, he's displaying. That's an automatic. There's a sign stimulus that triggers that. I looked up to see what fixed action patterns we have. I knew about most of these. The grasp reflex with the baby, and then the rooting reflex. When you touch the cheek, the baby turns its head and tries to nurse. Those are fixed action patterns. Human babies actually have a dive reflex. If you put the baby in the water, instantly they close their mouth, hold their breath, and start kicking. That's what we call a dive reflex. Now, that doesn't mean they can survive in the water. It just is their instinct to immediately hold their breath, close their mouth, and start kicking. And that's what we call a fixed action pattern. So I got to thinking, okay, what's the difference between instinct and fixed action pattern? So I looked it up. An instinct is any innate behavior, that's going to be a genetic behavior, that an organism performs without prior learning experience. A fixed action pattern is a type of instinctive behavior. So the fixed action patterns are instinctive, and so therefore they're part of the innate or instinctive. I don't know why they don't just keep it all instinctive, but they don't. So it's an innate or instinctive behavior, happens automatically. There's no learning. So what is actually learning? Well, they found that what we thought was instinctive can actually be modified through practice, and that's what we know of as learning. A durable change in behavior brought about by an experience. If we look at the little chick here, the laughing gull, they did where they showed the pecking accuracy of a newborn, and it's just kind of all over the board there, isn't it? It's trying to figure out where to go. Pecking is instinctive, but after 2 days, look how accurate it is trying to get the food from the mom. So you can see there that the accuracy is not great as a newborn, but it's adapted. The pecking is still instinctive, but the accuracy is actually learned. Now, most of us are familiar with imprinting. Fly Away Home, I think, was the movie that most people have seen, where they raise the baby goose and and then teach it how to fly. That's what imprinting is. When an animal is young, many animals, not all, it forms an association with the first moving object it sees. It should be its kin, its mother, siblings, something like that. And there's a sensitive period where they need to be able to bond with members of their same species for survival. If they bond to something that's a predator, then they're going to be eaten and they're not going to be very successful. And in this case, I think the guy's name was Lorenz. He actually had the goslings imprinted on him, and he had to teach them how to swim and fly and do all of that kind of stuff. I once got some owl eggs, and I called the government about them, and they said I had to destroy them because the owls would imprint on me and think I was their parent. And we know that that could be deadly because when they're released into the wild, they could actually go down to humans thinking they would take care of them. Here you see Lorenz swimming with the goslings, and you've seen where people like get gliders to teach them to fly, all of that kind of stuff. They imprint on you as the parent. As I mentioned earlier, there's 4 types of learned behavior. Habituation, which is ignoring the environmental cues around you. Like, I guess in town they were trying to use fireworks to get rid of the vultures in town. After a while, they're going to ignore them. Same thing with pigeons. They just ignore them. You know, they'll respond to it a few times and then they'll ignore it. Classical conditioning, this is where you get some kind of a reward or punishment, and there's a connection between the two. And it might not even make sense. Pavlov had the dog, then he rang a bell, gave the dog food. Every time he rang the bell, he would start to slobber because he knew that it was going to mean food. Marketing does this to us all the time. They give us those luscious commercials late at night that say, you want Taco Bell, or you want pizza, or you want ice cream. By seeing the mental image, then we know if we get it, it's a reward. So it just kind of conditions us to expect that. And it could be a punishment as well. Hopefully, the idea is that you get a reward instead of a punishment. Operant conditioning, trial and error. In the Skinner's box, they put the mice in and they pressed the levers and they got a treat, some levers. So they just kept repeating and trying over and over in order to be able to condition them to be able to do what they want them to do. And then insight reasoning, this is where you solve a problem without any experience at all. Now you might be watching someone do it and then you do it, or you might even just try it yourself, but insight is the ability to learn behavior as well. There are main 2 types of associative learning, where you learn to associate something, either a reward or a negative punishment. In classical conditioning, you learn to link the 2 things together. In operant conditioning, it's reinforced by some kind of behavior, whether it's a treat or punishment. So it's reinforced by some type of behavior there. And we saw back here that the classical is Pavlov and the operant is Skinner. In associative learning, there's a change in behavior. That's the whole purpose of it. So Pavlov gave 2 different types of stimulus, and the animal formed an association between them. Here's the poor little dog right here. So you can see the bell, again, caused him to salivate because he gave him food every time he heard the bell. And then after a while, he quit giving him food, but he still salivated. Associative learning, the operant conditioning is our other one. This is trick training in animals. We got to do behind the scenes at SeaWorld one time, and they showed us how they train them through operant conditioning to even do things like give them a fluke so that they can take a blood sample. So a lot of operant conditioning goes in animal behavior. Sometimes it's latent operant conditioning. There doesn't immediately appear to be a reward, but later down the road that behavior is reinforced. Orientation and migratory behavior, we know that that is a built-in instinctive behavior, but they do learn how to move. Many birds use the sun or the stars. If you put a bird in a dark room with no windows, they will orient themselves to go south in the winter and north in the summer. It's instinctive. The long distance travel, it's amazing how many thousands of miles some of these animals travel for their migration. But again, all of that uses cues from the earth. Now, a lot of them, they say, use the magnetic field, which is changing, and that may be a problem for them down the road. But some of them use stars. And you can see how far the starlings go in their quest to go to their old ground so that they can breed. Now you'll notice the red ones are inexperienced ones. They end up in Spain. That would be my personal favorite. But then the ones that have a lot of experience, they'll end up with the wintering range north of Spain there. Cognitive learning, learning through observation, imitation, and insight. Insight learning is where you solve a problem without any prior experience. You've seen where the chimpanzees stack the boxes to reach the bananas. There's a really cool PBS video series on this. The raven learned to retrieve meat hanging on a string from a branch. And even inside of a box, used a tool to open it. There's a really old movie, I found it though online, called Granby's Primates. They were building the new cages for the animals, and the animals would watch them during the day, and at night they would go out and imitate the behaviors. Someone left a screw, they picked it up, they took a rock and hit it like a hammer. And so that type of insight learning, they'd never done it before, but they were able to do it because they saw something do it, or they figured it out on their own. Do animals have emotions? I'd say yes. I know a lot of people say they don't, but we know body language is there. If you've watched any of those tear-jerking videos, people coming home from being overseas, in quarantine or something, the animals go berserk because they're so happy to see them. You've seen animals that get depressed because their owners are gone. You've seen the ones that literally cry when they see their owners on the screen. Loss. Some animals will die because of loss. And all of those are natural emotions. So yes, I believe they do. I do believe they have it. I know it's called anthropomorphism, where you attribute human traits, and we've kind of gone over the board on that. There's some concern about our animals have become so much an accessory rather than animals that it's not good for their welfare. If they get tossed out, then how are they going to be able to survive because they don't have any skills? So it's just something to think about there. And I hope you've enjoyed today's presentation.